Hey everybody, Professor Snart checking in again. So it's Wednesday morning when I'm recording this, so we're just kind of wrapping up or getting towards wrapping up our first workshop. I'll get into our due dates here. So the short story, kind of our first kick at the cat, you might say, although a genre that I think is maybe more familiar to people, even if you've never really written a short story before, you're kind of more familiar, I'm guessing, with that genre, short fiction or even longer fiction in the form of a novel. So it's a little more comfortable, I think, relatively speaking. So we submitted our work on that Monday. We're providing ample, extensive feedback per my instructions in the videos here, but also, of course, in the course itself by that Wednesday. And so that sort of wraps up the short fiction part of our course. Unfortunately, like I've communicated with a couple of you, there's no opportunity within the course itself to revise and resubmit. We just kind of don't have time, even in the full 16-week session, let alone the 5-week here, because of the number of genres that we want to cover in our class as a kind of introductory course. There's no opportunity built in to like revise the short story or the poem that we'll write or whatever. But that's not to say that, just like with anything, you couldn't, if you're interested, contact me, and we can kind of work individually. If you revise the short story, I'd be happy to take a look and provide some further feedback and talk with you a little bit more about it. And of course, I would encourage people, and I'll do this a little bit more as we get towards the end of our course, to think about, trying to publish your work. A great venue is the literary magazine here at COD called Prairie Light Review, sometimes just called PLR. And again, I'll post some links and information about that as we get a little bit further or towards the end of our course. So because there's no revision built in necessarily to our course, it's hard to get motivated to do it. Like it's just going to be a file that sits in your Google Drive or on your desktop or laptop or whatever. But if you are thinking about publication, it gives you a nice goal to work towards. And again, we can have a discussion kind of around that individually if you're interested. Remember, we can meet virtually really easily as well, so it's not like you have to come to campus or even be around campus or even in the country necessarily. We can certainly coordinate a time to chat for 5 or 10 minutes. So revision is not part of our course, but it's certainly still part of what you can be doing with me or in the context of the creative writing that we're doing here. So it's not like a graded part, but it still is sort of, if you want it to be, a part of the course. Okay, so I wanted to get us a couple of units ahead here because, again, we move so fast. We're actually midterm, if you can believe that. So we transition away from short fiction and into a really interesting genre, and one that's maybe not so familiar, at least by name to some people. It's called creative nonfiction. So units 6 and 7 kind of are that bridge unit where we're not writing in the genre for the workshop necessarily, but we're looking towards our next workshop, and we'll look at that assignment in just a second, and kind of wrapping our heads around what this genre is, how it's both the same as short fiction but also different from short fiction. So again, those kind of bridge units. So creative nonfiction it's almost like, if you think deeply about it, it's kind of a contradiction in terms. It's nonfiction, so it's true, but it's also creative. Not just maybe creative as in interesting, but creative as in like imaginary or created like a short story would be. And it kind of bridges those two different worlds. And truthfully, it's just a useful kind of marker to organize our course. So we don't want to think too deeply about, is this work of art officially fiction or is it officially creative nonfiction? We don't need to get that granular about it. But it is a slightly different genre that we're looking at. So in creative nonfiction, what we're doing, and in this unit we have the opportunity to listen to, and watch reading and discussion a couple of authors who are, again, sort of like bridging that fiction to nonfiction so-called divide a little bit. And you'll hear them talk about how, in their minds at least, creative nonfiction works, and its strengths, maybe its weaknesses, what draws them to it, and all that kind of stuff. And then we have a quick discussion board reflecting on the video here. It's sort of relatively speaking, less intensive unit for us. There's not a ton of content outside of the video, which is a little bit longer. It's not just like a 5-minute clip. So you, by all means, you could watch it, in chunks, or you don't have to sit there for the whole thing, all in one sitting. But it provides some good ideas for us to think about. So creative nonfiction, and I'm just going to keep scrolling through these as I talk kind of generally about it, just so we can see what's on the horizon. Again, another video interview. These are all authors who have visited and read their work at COD, and then we do interviews with them, either scripted or we record their readings that they've done. So it's not just like random YouTube web people. They're actually folks who are, in some cases, local or have otherwise ties to the area. Some of them have direct ties to COD in some cases. But they're all writers who've come and read their work as part of what we call the Writers Read series. Okay, so anyway, again, same thing, and I'll talk about this in a second. So creative nonfiction it's a little bit like some of our earlier, like framing a memory work. So it fundamentally is telling a true story from your personal experience, not somebody else's, but your own. So in some ways it makes for a really easy genre because you don't have to invent some fantastical story that doesn't already exist. You don't have to comb through the back pages of the local section of the newspaper or a newspaper to find some quirky story to tell. You just tell a story from your experience. But just like with the framing a memory assignment, the trick, and this is the creative part of creative nonfiction, is to take the nonfiction, to take the events that happen, and you can't just sort of list them in order or tell us the most extraordinary traumatic thing that ever happened and hope that has impact because it's just so over the top or hyperbolic. Again, for this assignment, or not for this one, but for the creative nonfiction workshop, I would really challenge people not to choose the most over the top, dramatic, traumatic event in your life and then tell us that story. It's almost like we let the emotion of the thing do the work rather than the craft of writing, and that's sort of the creative part. So you can take liberties for sure with the so-called truth of what happened. So if an event happened on a Tuesday, but you'd like it for symbolic reasons to happen on a weekend or on a Sunday, sort of an iconic day in some ways, then you can fudge that a little bit. But you're not making up a story that is totally made up and totally never happened. So you're still working from, I don't know, fact, truth, whatever term you want to use, but you get the idea, your experience. But of course the creative part is like, how do you use language? How do you use the skills of storytelling to make it interesting to people? And that, again, is where you can think about, okay, you have a series of events that you want to narrate, but is strict chronological order the best way to do that? So imagine a simple, event that happens on a day that starts sort of in the morning and ends at 3 p.m., a first day of school, for example. We want to tell that story, but maybe we want to actually begin at the end, right at the time that the bell rings to dismiss students for the day, and we're finally free from school, but we have all of these years in front of us because it's our first day of, I don't know, grade 3, whatever. So it's nonfiction, right? This is actually the events that unfolded for us, but it's creative in as much as we're using the skills of the creative writer, of storytelling, to make the story interesting, whether it's the big picture kind of moving events around or thinking about that Freytag's pyramid, remember, that we looked at and I just did it with my hand, I know you can't see that, we looked at for that earlier unit, but it still sort of applies here, right? And do we want to stick with that strict symmetrical, the climactic moment is right in the middle? Probably not. So we can begin to manipulate the nonfiction part of it using the creative tools that we're learning throughout our course here. So that's the big picture stuff, like moving events around, or the chronology of it, the pacing of it, like how long paragraphs are, how short paragraphs are, and being really conscious of how we move the reader through our story, but also on the level of the sentence, right? Complex sentences, simple sentences. There's not one that is always the best choice, but it's being conscious of, intentional about those choices and choosing the best option for the effect that you as the writer want to achieve. So clearly short paragraphs, short clipped simple sentences, they produce a much different effect for the reader, like a little more jagged, sort of a staccato effect, versus very thick descriptive paragraphs, long sentences, right? It's a much different reading experience, and you as the writer need to be in control of that. So again, all of that stuff is really the creative part of creative nonfiction. So it's both an easy genre because we're just writing from our own experience, again, like the framing of memory, but it's also really challenging because we have to take what's already kind of close to us and make it interesting and compelling for somebody else. So Unit 6, just a fairly straightforward bridge unit, get some ideas churning. Unit 7, a little bit more of that, but then I think a really interesting exercise here in the model of what's called the This I Believe series. You can hear it on NPR, visit the website here. I'm suggesting that you probably read a few examples, but certainly this one's a good one. And it's fundamentally creative nonfiction, although it's shaped in this statement of belief. And it doesn't have to be religious or spiritual belief, as you'll see in the information here. So we're not writing one for the series, obviously. We're just doing it for our own purposes. Although, again, if you were interested in looking to publish, this would be an interesting opportunity. Don't repeat words. That's a good writerly suggestion, too. So I won't go through the nuances here or the details because it's all within the examples that you'll find. So you're doing like a belief statement. We're keeping it short. Again, thinking about more words is not always better. More description is not always better, but being careful with our word choice and what of the 5 words we could put down, which is the one that evokes the most, and let's use that one. And then we're doing, of course, the reply piece here as well. But what you'll notice is that even though this is shaped around the model of the This I Believe series, it's still fundamentally creative nonfiction. Obviously, you're talking about your own kind of experience, specific belief, but you want to make that interesting and compelling to the reader. So what you'll notice as we go through our course here is that fundamentally we are learning to tell compelling and interesting stories, whether they're so-called true or so-called made up, right? Fiction or creative nonfiction, it's all really about storytelling. Which brings us to Unit 8, which is going to be our next workshop. So this is where I'm getting us really far ahead so we can be, I don't want to be doing these like the day of. So a couple more examples to look at, and I really love this one because it features Tom Montgomery Fate, one of the sort of premier practitioners nationally of creative nonfiction, and an English prof here at COD. So I work with him on an almost daily basis. He's a really great guy. And we have some samples from a couple of his books here right in our course. So again, look at the way that he uses real experience, makes it interesting and compelling, doesn't always go for the big hyperbolic, traumatic, or dramatic moment. It's a really, he makes it look easy, and as with a lot of things, you know, you go see a concert pianist and they make it look like you can just sit up there and kind of whack away at the keys and great music comes out. So the mark of someone who does it really well is that it doesn't look like they're trying that hard, and I think Tom is a perfect example of that. And then of course we have the usual review of how the workshops work, and the assignment, right? Basically what I've just been talking about here, and then you'll see down below here our actual discussion board. All right, so that gets us into and sort of through actually our next few units after we finish up our short fiction. So sort of a longer announcement here, but trying to cover a lot of territory. And as with the short fiction, as soon as we get into this creative nonfiction Unit 6, begin to start working on, right, start a file for your creative nonfiction workshop. So don't do this one, be done, do this one, be done, and then start your creative nonfiction. I would get this rolling kind of parallel with working through these things, or these earlier units as well. And then we turn around and do poetry, and then honestly we're done. We literally are at the midpoint of our term here. So hopefully everyone is enjoying the course, finding it relatively easy to navigate, which sounds like a sort of simple thing, but I think is really important to enable you to like learn in a course, so you're not always like scratching around trying to find stuff. Hopefully what we've run into as far as like some conceptual ideas, some theory here has been useful for you. Some of the practice that we've been doing, significant objects, I think is really a fun assignment. So hopefully it's been a good course so far, even if it's really quick, and that we can head into the last, the post-midterm part of our course with really good kind of energy and focus, and honestly just a couple more weeks is all we need or all we have together. All right, so as always, questions, concerns, be in touch with me, and I will talk with everybody soon.